We are back on Morning Line. Our guest with us this morning, Davidson County District Attorney Glenn Funk. Phone lines are open. If you'd like to join in the conversation, also following on Facebook as well. A couple other things, as we've been talking the first two segments of the show about the elementary school shooting in Texas, but a couple of high-profile cases. I want to ask you about the Caitlyn Kaufman case. And I know, it's pending, and so there's certain things you can and can't say, but we all know about that horrible case. The nurse on her way to St. Thomas, shot, found later on 440. Okay, I'm just curious. I know there was a bond hearing for one of the suspects. We haven't heard back from the judge whether or not the bond had been, he was seeking bond to get out. I don't know if you've heard yet whether or not that one way or the other has been granted. And is that still scheduled for trial? Is it October of this year? It's coming up.
I can't say that we are optimistic that we will be able to get that case tried this year.
Okay. And as far as the bond issue, I think you opposed this individual getting bond. Everyone's entitled to ask for bond. Have you heard anything on that front yet?
Don't know.
Okay. Do you think it'll go to trial?
Yes.
It will go to trial.
I believe that will go to trial.
Okay.
And that's about the limit of what I can talk about a pending case.
All right, let's talk about a case.
You love to ask me about pending cases.
Well, and you always say, okay, it's going to go to trial, but as we've seen, sometimes things happen and they don't end up going to trial. But it is still scheduled to move forward. Will the two of them be tried together, the two suspects, do you know?
Unclear at this point.
Unclear at this point. Okay. The one case that I think you probably can talk about, and I bring it up, the Radandavat case. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion about that. I know that she and some of her supporters now are going to state lawmakers and seeking to pass a law that will give nurses, at least in Tennessee, and maybe a national model then for qualified immunity with regard to mistakes made on the job. I don't know where that'll go. That basically would mean that they'd be insulated from criminal prosecution for mistakes made on the job, with perhaps some exceptions. What are your thoughts on a law that would maybe do something like that, not just for you, but for any district attorney?
I cannot imagine any law that would give immunity for the amount of gross neglect that Radandavat engaged in the death of Charlene Murphy. I can't imagine it. That was so deep and profound that when the medical expert was testifying at trial, her comment was, I can't find anything that she did right. Right? So, qualified immunity is an effort to not have anyone accountable, no responsibility. Deterrence comes from knowing that there might be some accountability. And the whole purpose of civil law is to have some accountability, and just about every crime is also a civil offense. The question is not, well, is it a civil offense? The question is it also a criminal offense? And the ultimate deterrence is a potential criminal prosecution. So you want to deter bad behavior, especially bad behavior that could cost someone their life, especially when someone has a duty of care. So, I would have to see any proposed legislation, but generally I'm opposed to granting immunity to someone just based on their profession, just based on you got to have a real reason for why you would give someone immunity on any type of behavior.
Gotcha. I want to give some of these questions coming on Facebook. There's some here who, say Steve and Tommy, they're talking about, well, does General Funk, he talks about gun control and things like this, but I mean, they don't think that you're tough enough on reoffenders, that too many people are getting out, or you're not prosecuting enough. And just, if you want to address that, that's the perception from some, that maybe you're not tough enough on criminals.
Sure. Look, our conviction rate on gun cases is nearly 90%. Our policy is we do not dismiss gun cases. We ask for incarceration on gun cases. We're doing all we can to do that. I don't know where they would get that perception. When it comes to low-level, nonviolent, victimless offenses, we work on programs when incarceration is not the answer. We try to make sure folks have support to where they can be successful and they're not going to reoffend. But there are times when the severe sanction of incarceration is needed, is appropriate. And especially on gun cases, yeah, we're about violent crime, we're about guns, we're about public safety. I mean, that's what we do.
So that's basically, I mean, the focus. Those are the folks that are going to end up behind bars. We know it's been talked about quite a bit about how for low levels of marijuana, you're not going to lock someone up who gets caught with a joint in their pocket down on 2nd and Broad on a Friday night.
Right.
So, I mean, the focus is on the violent crimes, and you're saying that you're toughest on those repeat offenders.
Oh, for sure.
And what about at the juvenile court level? And I know there's a separate juvenile court judge, and she makes a lot of these decisions, but you have a juvenile prosecutor. You see so often, and we'll post or have stories on a couple of teens that were busted for a carjacking. They're caught with one of these weapons that they maybe had stolen, and then you see that they get out, 2 or 3 days later, and then they're arrested a couple of weeks later.
I would challenge you on, you see that they get out in 2 or 3 days. A juvenile with a weapon, the policy, not just of my office, but of Judge Calloway, is that they are detained pending their hearing, and so that's a minimum 30 days.
30 days,
that's
you're saying?
A minimum 30 days.
Now, maybe with weapons.
No, if for any possession of a weapon for a juvenile. Now, if it's possession of a weapon not only by a juvenile but by a juvenile that does a violent crime, yeah, that we're oftentimes going to be moving for detention in those cases. And the only thing more dangerous than somebody who is irresponsible with a weapon is a child who is irresponsible with a firearm, because they don't understand the permanence of death or the sanctity of life. And so we have to make sure that the deterrence for not only that individual but for their friends and colleagues that maybe they go to school with or middle school or high school with, they need to know that a juvenile with a weapon, those don't mix.
Let's take a call from Derek. Derek, good morning. Hi, Derek.
Hi.
Good morning. What's on your mind?
Oh, nothing much. I just want to say hi, Mr. Barris. I'm a great fan of you and the Channel 5 network, and Mr. Funk. You're a great guy, man. And I actually, voted for you again for re-election, and I'm glad you won.
Thanks, Derek. I appreciate it.
Not to take up too much time. I just want to, send my condolences to the family in Texas, and if I may, I have 2 poems here that I just want to, send to the public. The first one is called "Good Night, My Child," and it goes, "Good night, my child, my darling baby. It's time to go to bed, for the night has come. So rest your little head. You have gone through so much today, so much for your little hands to do, so many games to play. Here's a little kiss for you, and I just want to say I'm sorry for your little accident when you fell and hurt your knee. But tomorrow is a brand new day, and there will be a brand new game to play. So now, my child, your day is complete, and you're so good when you are asleep." And the second one is for teachers, and it is, "Teachers are special people that we are surrounded by each day. They help our little children to find their way in and out of life's obstacles, from reading to making ends meet. They are the pathways for guiding little feet. They are sometimes needed for wiping away tears that even when dried are recalled in later years. So even though it might seem trivial, teachers supply a great beginning. So little lives and little minds can have a very happy ending."
Thank you for that.
Thanks,
of those.
Derek.
Yeah,
very nice.
But you listen to that, especially "Good Night, My Child," and teachers, and that's the simple, wonderful way it's supposed to be. And those 19 children in Texas,
right?
They're not going to be waking up, and that's just it's just awful. And then the teachers, I was going to ask you then too, your thoughts too. Some folks are saying, well, let's start if teachers are willing to arm teachers.
Yeah. So. I don't know that that's necessarily what the teachers would want. All right, teachers are trained to teach.
Some might, I would imagine.
They're trained to teach. Obviously, we would need a ton of training for folks with regards to firearms, especially around children. I'd rather have a professional that's a professional with regards to protective services, like a school resource officer in the school. The more guns that are in a school, the more likely it is that somebody's going to make a mistake and maybe not have it locked up properly, and a child gets their hands on the gun, or it's a situation where there might be some type of misidentification of who the shooter might be, and then all of a sudden an innocent person. And so if the amount of training that would be necessary for school teachers to become essentially trained law enforcement protectors would be very high. And I'm just a big believer in let's let the professionals do their job.
The issue of anyone carrying a weapon for personal security and protection, I understand that, and several people have talked about on Facebook that they carry guns to protect themselves or their families when they go about, and I understand that if it makes you feel safer. You said earlier, the solution to a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And,
many people say that. And I would like to say a good guy who is a professional with a gun. I know,
exactly. I was going to let you clarify, because I'm wondering, in your experience in the news media, if there's some kind of mass shooting going on somewhere and some citizen who happens to have a gun intervenes, takes out the shooter, saves the day, that's a huge story. And I can tell you this, it's not buried. I'm going to be all over that. I just haven't seen it. And, these people, I don't know if it's a false sense, they have the weapon, but these cases happen with the element of surprise. What is your thought just on so many people carrying weapons, which I understand and they have a legal right to do it, but when there's a bunch with guns, it puts law enforcement sometimes in a difficult position to know who the bad guy is.
Well, and that opens up a whole another discussion with regards to with this proliferation of weapons, right? Used to be an officer pulls somebody over for speeding, they see the gun, they get the person out of the car, they then retrieve the gun, they seize the gun, they arrest the person for carrying a weapon. But not many folks had guns in their cars. You go back 20 years ago, not many folks had guns in their cars. And now, if every time a police officer makes a traffic stop, they have to expect that as they walk into this adversarial situation between them and the motorist, that person, one, is not going to be happy to be pulled over, because nobody's happy to and number two, that person is armed.
That you have to assume. As the old days,
have to assume.
You wouldn't assume it. Now, I'm assuming, I'm in traffic, and I used to be a Type A driver, and I'm not. One reason is for this. I assume every other vehicle on the road today has someone with a gun.
I was talking to an officer who's been retired and is now working as a criminal investigator, not in our office, but and we were having this discussion. He goes, yeah, you know what, I was in patrol in the 90s and I never approached a car that I was pulling over for a traffic violation thinking that the person would be armed. He goes, but you're right. Every officer now has to assume that the person is armed.
Yeah. And then, the responsible gun owner lets the officer know, and that should be fine, as long, but you never know in those cases where someone pulls a gun and starts shooting.
Right.
And we certainly see the road rage cases. Did you say we have to take a break, Mary Elena? Oh yeah, we'll take a break, be back with our final segment with the General right after this.
Okay.
And that should be fine, as long, but you never know in those cases where someone pulls a gun and starts shooting.